Lovely. Kind of feels like a bad segue into the next session because that's all about the blue economy, things coming from the from the sea. So up on stage, the blue team, Stuart Briosa, come up again, and Brandon Jew from Mr. Jew Seaweed Hot Dogs, and Sachi Singh from Rootless. Where are you? Come up and join me on stage. Yeah. Well, welcome, welcome. And Sachi. Oh, Sachi's not here. We'll have to discuss this with the two members of the blue team. One that is super blue shirt even. Yep. Okay. Yep. And you probably have some blue garments elsewhere, right? I do. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So what about this thing called the blue economy of the ocean, right? So, um, why should we go out and hunt for food in the seas instead of land?
Well, I mean, to piggyback on the last conversation, food produced or that comes from the seas is delicious, number one. I think that there is an amazing, opportunity to eat diversity from the oceans. I would like to maybe segue from why we should be doing this and how we should be doing this.
Okay.
And I think that that we have gotten so used to eating high on the food chain, right? And food flown from anywhere in the world to be at your dinner table. And I think of things like bluefin tunas. I think of the hamachis or seafood that is just kind of these trophy-like fish, right? That require so many resources, whether it's leaving a high carbon footprint or the fish feed in aquaculture in general. And I personally believe that we should be eating from the bottom up and focused on net positivity within our oceans.
So like jellyfish and
Seaweeds. I
seaweeds.
think shellfish culture, right? So oysters, mussels, clams. I think bait fish, obviously. I'm a bit biased, but anchovies, mackerel, sardines, squid, things that are are the bait, generally speaking, right? And not the trophies from the ocean.
Okay, so Brennan, I sense some sort of a conflict here because you're actually talking about hot dogs and seaweed. Is that
This is the hot dogs was a kind of a joke. Um, I guess I'm here to kind of piggyback on the idea that eating more from the coast really we're the seafood kind of industry, at least in America, there isn't a lot of transparency until recently. I would say the last 10 years, I think there's been a lot more, I would say, interest from that side to inform chefs and for us to inform diners of where really our actual fish is coming from. And so because we're dealing with a lot of middlemen in a way, we're still kind of left to rely on those relationships to ensure us that we're going to be getting things that we are wanting to ensure that are sustainable to the ocean. But I think from our end, what we serve at the restaurant, we deliberately only look to the local waters.
okay?
And I think that's, beyond the fish, I think it's actually being more deliberate in using seaweed And,
But
and coastal.
have you actually made the hot dog out of seaweed?
I have not.
You have not. Okay, so no. Another of the big lies coming from the US. Okay, cool. No, but I think it's interesting to see what you can use from this, because we are not so used to using all the things that you mentioned, right? But if we're going to fix the food system, we probably need to venture out in the ocean, because we're kind of stuck mentally on the land-based food system.
Well, I feel like that there's been a huge effort across the country, and when I say country, I specifically mean the United States, is that, so much emphasis has been on large ocean fish. And accessibility is definitely tied to the coasts when it comes to smaller seafood items. And to Brandon's point, I mean, in San Francisco, there's an enormous movement to use not just local seafood, but also seafood that has, that we know the fisherman's first name, for example. And I think that becomes a method to inform truthfulness, honesty, and methods for catching ocean fish.
But we don't just need to capture things in the ocean. We can just sow and harvest things like seaweed, for instance.
Correct.
And it grows like crazy in
It
the
does.
ocean.
It grows very easily and prolifically. There's a lot of really, it's so many different kinds of seaweed, textures, colors, and I think they're kind of an area that for us as chefs we're able to really use a lot of our creativity in how we present those. But things like sea grapes and sea lettuce, not just like the kombus and the noris, but there's all of these other cat's tongue, and there's so many different kinds of seaweed. I think trying to incorporate it into your diet deliberately, especially if you're from a coastal region, I think that would be some of the new responsibility as a diner in those coastal regions.
But I guess this is also a cultural thing, right? Because in Asia, you've been eating seaweed for like millions of years, or at least a very long time, right?
Yeah.
So how come people in Asia are so good at eating seaweed and we're not? Is it just about culture, traditions, or do they actually have better seaweed in Asia?
There's great seaweed there, but I also think it's about probably fishermen and the people that are going to get those things, wanting to get those things for diners or for chefs, because seaweed is very perishable too. It does transform after it comes out of the water. It has a certain shelf life, but then you can dehydrate it and do other things, pickle it. But as a fresh ingredient, it's a beautiful ingredient that we're hoping that just by talking about it more, that people will be interested in eating it more.
So things from the ocean is more perishable than land-based stuff. Is that how I should think of it?
I would say the clock is ticking the moment it comes out of the water.
Okay.
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Just as a vegetable is harvested from the ground, obviously it's got a shelf life, but it's with hydration you can keep a head of lettuce for a longer period of time. Where seaweed is like any seafood item. I mean, it does become very perishable, and the drying mechanisms, as Brendan was talking about, are really imperative to it. We've got a very abundant nori. There's a lot of nori harvesting that comes off of the Mendocino coast, and we rarely see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see nori served fresh or offered fresh as frequently as I do dried. Yeah. And to dry it is quite simple, where it's taken out of the ocean, it's washed in clean ocean water, right, and laid out on screens and dried by the sun. So it's a very simple process, and obviously the harvesting of these different seaweeds from wild form, there are specific times throughout the year that the nutrients are the highest, the lettuces are the highest. There's obviously there's not a red tide that's in process, and they're harvested 3 to 4 weeks for the entire year. And I work with 3 different harvesters that supply our restaurants for nori specifically, that supply us for the entire year in dried form.
Okay. So now the Eat Lancet Commission is kicking off their next gen report on how to eat sustainably and within healthy within the planetary borders. And when I look at it, they say you should eat, this much lentils, this much vegetables, this much meat. And if we took the blue perspective on what we should eat in the future, what would a typical future dish look like?
I think it could easily be like a salad that is seaweed, like 80% seaweed as a salad, that you would have maybe a seaweed broth that would be, also like, obviously dashi is a real simple way to think about the base of a lot of soup that you can create. And then I think even after that, like braising of seaweed like kombu, you can even wrap it in other proteins even and bake it. So I think that seeing seaweed more on menus is going to be something that you will see soon, because I think the access to these ingredients, and also I think the realization that we have this very abundant product that is also beneficial for us to include into our diet.
I would agree wholeheartedly with this. A dish that actually is frequently on our menu, on and off in various forms, is quite simple. Potatoes, right, that are cooked in a broth with seaweed, ginger, garlic, and then grilled, and then served with what I call a seaweed butter, right, where it's a dashi-based liquid, fermented vegetables like turnips and cabbage and the juices to flavor that, and then braised seaweed. And so all of this is stewed together and served with grilled potatoes. And sometimes we'll actually put a grilled piece of fish along with this as well. But the potatoes alone are quite lovely. And this whole concept it's stunning to the eye as well as to the palate.
Also, some of the seaweed properties that are still, I think, we're still trying to discover how to use them more is like agar and carrageenan, things that you can substitute maybe grain-based thickeners instead of using seaweed thickeners instead. So yeah, that's a whole other area that you get a certain kind of texture, a certain kind of mouthfeel that is based in seaweed.
But okay, so we know a lot about stuff that we have on land because we can walk amongst it and see it easily and pick it and taste it. But is it possible to know anything about what exists out there in the ocean and the possibilities yet? Have we, how much of the seaweed sorts have we tried yet? How many of the bottom living creatures have we tasted?
Well, I think that what we're seeing off of the California coast right now is abalone are very typical off the coast, and they are declining rapidly because sea urchin have moved in, and abalone's primary food is seaweed, right? And the sea urchin are eating the seaweed, and what we're seeing is we're actually seeing a lot of our seaweed forests being depleted, and we've got an abundance of sea urchin that are on the forest floor eating these kelp forests and starving themselves out along with the abalone themselves. Yeah. And this is something that we're learning a lot about, and this is over the last 10. Say again?
Can we eat sea urchins?
Well, of course we can eat sea urchins, but here's the thing that I've noticed in the last 5 years. We had an abundant sea urchin. We had an abundance of sea urchin being harvested by divers, right? But what's happening is that they're pulling up large, what look like beautiful urchins, very lively on the exterior, and you crack them open, and they're near empty. So they're starving themselves because there's not enough seaweed happening. So this is an interesting predatorial issue with what's happening. The abalone have been essentially starved out from the urchins. The urchins are eating the kelp, and yet kelp has a very short, reproductive system, right? We're talking 25 to 28 days where you can start grow sea lettuce. But what's happening now is that so much of our resources are being eaten up, and that's another problem, that's happening on the California coastline. And we would gladly eat sea urchin, gladly. But what's happening is as you're pulling these urchins up, that they're starving themselves.
Okay, so that means that we're treating the oceans right now like we go into the wild wilderness and we pick stuff from the wild, right? So when will you start farm the oceans in a great way?
Well, this is something, an article was written recently of a Scandinavian company coming that's working in Japan, and they're looking to provide some of these resources on the California coastline, which is to go out, harvest wild sea urchins, but bring them back into a cultivated, controlled eating environment where they can plump up the urchins and then sell them. And so we're hoping to see more of that because, technically we should be eating a lot of sea urchin that exists, but we don't have access to currently.
Okay, so sea urchins.
So there is a market for this.
And sea urchins are delicious, by the way.
They're amazing.
They're amazing.
Really
Okay, so very good. So we'll eat more sea urchins in the future, paired with a kelp salad and more of the anchovies instead of the trophy fish.
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
wonderful. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So let's have another conversation about conversations. Audrey Ashworth and Sharon Citona, are you here?